Hello and welcome to the Amargi Mosaic. I'm your host, Elif Sarican. Today I'm joined by journalist and lecturer in politics of the Middle East at the University of Oxford, Ezgi Başaran. Welcome back to the show, Ezgi.
Thank you for having me, Elif'ciğim. And thanks for Amargi for having me.
Thank you. So last time you were on the show, at this point, quite some months ago, we spoke about a lot of things, but one of the things we spoke a lot about was essentially Turkey's struggle in defining itself. And, we spoke about the constitution and some of the ways that
Yes.
that came about. Today, we're going to be discussing, related topics, but actually, in the last few months, there's been quite some changes, perhaps actually on that very topic about the way Turkey may be thinking about defining, or some might say redefining itself. So we're going to talk a bit about Devlet Bahçeli's quite remarkable article published recently. We'll talk a bit about Erdoğan's position on the current process and also what's happening to the main opposition, the Republican People's Party
Yes.
in Turkey, which, for those who may not know, is the founding party of the Turkish Republic. And if we get to it, we'll talk a little bit about what's happening in the broader region and particularly in the way that it may be related to some of the things, some of the other things we discuss. So I want to start by Bahçeli's text. On Monday, 18th May, Devlet Bahçeli published a 7-point roadmap in Türkgün newspaper that goes further than anything he said before, particularly in its detail. He's
Mhm.
proposing a formal status for Abdullah Öcalan, a peace process and politicization coordinatorship, and even in that title, there's been a lot of talk around whether people are calling this a process or a peace process. So, in a way, Bahçeli, once and for all has defined this actually in this text as a peace process. And, that coordinatorship would give the Kurdish leader an institutional role in managing what actually he calls as well, Bahçeli, this transition. He's calling for democratic, political, and economic reforms. He's also saying national unity must be inclusive, encompassing, and protective. For those who know particularly who Bahçeli is and his role in Turkish politics, this is really, really remarkable. And I do really want to talk about the content of this text. But before we do, for those who might not know, who is Devlet Bahçeli?
Hmm. Yes, Devlet Bahçeli is one of our most eccentric and enigmatic leaders, political leaders. He's been leading the main nationalist party, MHP, since 1997. And the MHP comes from a far-right nationalist, Turkish nationalist party coming from what we call the ülkücü tradition. And it was part of the 1960s and 70s movement and street violence against the Turkish left. And it has a long history of hostility to Kurdish political claims, Armenian historical memory, and even for Alawites recognition. So this is also the party historically asked for death penalty for Abdullah Öcalan. And this is also the party and the leader that opposed every peace process or negotiation that called that we called Kurdish opening or peace process since, the most explicit one was 2009 and then 2013. So he built his career as being the arch nemesis of Abdullah Öcalan. But he has been also the coalition partner of Erdoğan since 2017, and they pass legislation together, so they win the presidential election together. But I mean, obviously he's part of the coalition, but Erdoğan is in the front seat. This is the only place where Erdoğan stayed in the back seat, where Devlet Bahçeli since 2000. 2024 October is the with the handshake of the Kurdish MPs in the National Assembly in Turkey is the face, public face, and the architecture of this process. So yes, I mean this is I don't know what we should call it. It's a pages long it's not an interview, it's an article, but I would like to call this as as a political intervention. That may be and it's an interesting piece because it also has yes, it calls it looks like it elevates Öcalan to a status, but he also binds and limits him. If you read between the lines, yes, Öcalan would coordinate dissolution and disarmament and communicate with the PKK cadres and head of internal resistance and splinters, and which I believe is one of his main worries, that the PKK or there will be splinter groups and offshoots that would be radicalized as one of his, I think, worries. It's very palpable within this text or piece. But he also says that Öcalan would have a status, but then he underlines that his prison, will remain formally intact, and the status is only limited to this process. And more importantly, this status is explicitly, he says, not a recognition of Öcalan as the leader of the Kurds or as a defender of ethnic rights or categorical rights. So, and it expires when this process, the logistics and all the operational technicalities are out of the way. And he also likes to decide the shape and limits of the Kurdish movement, and he sees himself that right, which is interesting. He says because he says, I mean, the Kurdish movement will have, I mean, he doesn't explicitly say the political party, but whatever the how it's going to politicize means that the political movement within the system should Türkiyeleşmek, which means a party of national program and party of Turkey. So it is interesting. There's also several interesting conflict resolution examples that are being invoked, and very interesting political science terms like political science frames such as Weberian, charismatic authority, organizational institutionalization, and leader-centric mobilization, collective action frames and whatnot. So some of them, I have to say, do not work well. And the conflict resolution cases, for example, presenting Spanish, ETA with the Spanish government and the British IRA cases, he present them as mono leadership negotiations is a bit historically misleading, for example,
Yeah.
because ETA has not was not dissolved through this through a single charismatic founder, and its founding generation were already long gone by 2011, which began with the negotiation with the Spanish state began,
Mm.
and there was no Öcalan equivalent in that case. If anything, I think ETA case suggests dissolution can proceed precisely because there's no founding figure which holds the power. So it's kind of a bit counterproductive for Öcalan, I mean, for Bahçeli's claims. Maybe IRA case is a bit closer to what he wants to say, but that is also problematic because in the IRA case, we have to remember the process that culminated with the Good Friday Agreement enabled Sinn Féin's leader Jerry Adams and Martin McGuinness. And Jerry Adams is very actually related to and interested in our in Turkey's Kurdish process, whom I've interviewed in 2013 when Turkey started the real peace process. And but th these are Jerry Adams and Martin McGuinness are they weren't conduits of directives of states, you know. So he wants Öcalan to have power, but the proposition he has is ironically, you know. So he wants Öcalan's operational reach over the cadres, the capacity to instruct them, to head off splinters, but that reach only historically flows from a position where Bahçeli carefully refusing to grant him. So I think, and we can talk about the influence of Öcalan and everything. And Öcalan, there's no doubt that Öcalan is central to the Kurdish movement, and he has proved his influence and power. And I do not agree a bit with people who claim he hasn't. I mean, what he has done after 26 years of being in prison was exceptional. I mean, it was his personal authority that really gathered, that managed to bring the PKK leadership together. And if you know the PKK just a bit, that leadership consists of very strong characters, you know, and he managed to bring them. As we know, there were heated debates during that time. But at the end, they declared end of an era, end of an arms struggle, and they said they disband the PKK. I don't think the importance of this is properly understood, and it is very understated. And but you know, this is I think we are not at a point to discuss the disarmament and you know the technicalities of disarmament, because we're not at this stage yet. We're in the baby steps. We hadn't have any legal amendments passed through the parliament that would enable the PKK to literally just do the DDR, the technicalities of the disarmament.
Mm.
But I think what Bahçeli's text, with its audience and timing, it reveals something different about what's going on within the Turkish state. That's what I read. I mean, we should
Yeah.
look at that a bit in a different. I mean, what's its aim? Yeah.
I think, I think what you said about, the text actually being a political intervention, perhaps into, I guess we can call, for the sake of argument, the Kurdish side or the PKK or Öcalan, that kind of that side of the equation. But it also is very clear and mentioned several times about the various responsibilities that the state must take
Oh,
on.
definitely.
And I think I can see what you're saying in terms of wanting to give some authority, but of course limit it. Partly, I think what some say, and I think, certain things, multiple things can be true at the same time, where
Oh,
also
definitely.
already for Bahçeli to write a text like this is
Oh,
actually
definitely.
quite a big deal. So it seems what he's trying to do is also really do quite a lot in, it's a long text for, a news article, like as in an article for a news website, but actually it's
Hmm.
still a relatively short intervention. I think,
Hmm.
therefore trying to achieve quite a lot. I also found it quite interesting for someone of Bahçeli's history to also talk a lot about, peace and reconciliation literature. So clearly he's really attempted to do his homework. And it's obviously very clear that like this text, and I don't mean this in a derogatory sense, I mean this actually in almost a complimentary sense. This text was not written by Bahçeli alone. And, it was in
Surely, surely.
consultation, and it was actually thought through what in his context, what he would have considered as experts in the topic as well. So I think, but you're right that there are some contradictions there. I think, he still talks about the terror-free Turkey, and that's like still the broad framing. I think partly perhaps because he kind of has no choice but to call it that in the context of the audience he's trying to reach. But I found it quite remarkable that he spoke really quite a lot about the democratization need. And, he frames it a bit like, we need to, and in a way, it's not untrue, right? Like he talks about democratization will remove the environment for terror to be able to, either reconvene or re-emerge. And that's not entirely untrue in that, that is a key, whether you define the Kurdish, movement or the PKK's activities as terroristic or not, that has been a key demand of the Kurdish movement, saying there is no need for armed struggle if there is democratization. So, in a way, Bahçeli is talking about that in his own terms. So, what does it mean? What does it mean that Bahçeli, someone like Bahçeli, is really talking about, a so-called terror-free Turkey and actually going beyond the security framing that him and others have defined this process by for the past, almost 2 years to a almost literally actually talking about the process in the framework that Öcalan has spoken about. So what does it mean that Bahçeli is actually talking about democratization to end terror?
So I think this text is not about democratization, and I think that yes, there is parts and sections that talks about democracy and rule of law, but in a very universal sense. And I think, yes, it is very, very important that it is Bahçeli, at the center of it, and Bahçeli saying these things. But I think we have to be really, really careful about Bahçeli's approach and praising it. Yes, you can read it as an, avant-garde move by Bahçeli in his own terms, of all people trying hard to, find a status for Öcalan. But what is the status? If you can read behind the line, between the lines, I think this whole text is trying to sell something to Erdoğan or the Turkish public. So, but that is perfectly okay. But we need to know what it is. Um, it is shocking, like you said, and it is, in a sense, must be applauded, but to a certain degree. I mean, because if you dig into the roadmap itself, you don't actually see any space left for the Kurdish movement to exist, as a Kurdish movement. Because what you see is a fully state-controlled process and a Kurdish political wing that is told to stop being Kurdish in any categorical sense. So I'm afraid this is Bahçeli's way of, again, selling it, the process to Erdogan and binding him to it, rather than offering anything to the Kurdish movement or to Öcalan. But that is perfectly okay if that is the agreement, because what I'm trying to say is, yes, this is Bahçeli doing it, but we have to be careful that it is very state oriented. I mean, he uses he is depoliticizing in a way, because I've read this like many times, and I get the same sense that it is kind of a Shakespearean irony in it because he is depoliticizing the Kurdish question, and he's structurally de-recognizing the Kurdish movement as a Kurdish movement. And that is a unique selling point. Um, while also squeezing Erdogan in a place, because now he is putting a concrete roadmap in front of Erdogan, and Erdogan needs to, yeah, visibly drag his feet or come up with an alternative, or just says, no, I'm just not doing this. So, but he is definitely, it aims for, I think the one of the aims is to sell this to Erdogan. So he uses the word siyasallaşma, politicization a lot
Mm, mm,
throughout. But what he actually doing is depoliticizing the Kurdish claims. You see, a bit like a really, really ironic. He is reframing the whole thing again as a security administrative matter. And sure, we're familiar with that. I mean, the whole thing is called terror-free Turkey, but and reads like a technical administrative problem. Uh, but we know that what I think we see, what I think it's what's different here in this case is a structural derecognition of the Kurdish movement. Because if we look at what he actually writes carefully and solemnly, it is right in front of us. He says Öcalan can coordinate the process, but he's explicitly not to be recognized as a Kurdish leader or defender of the ethnic rights. Dem Party or any successor party must Türkiyeleşmek, yani Turkeyize, or within his parlance means that they have to operate not as parties representing Kurds, as Kurds. Yeah, and when he gets to the section on democracy, I have to disagree that he writes in a very ambiguous, universal sense in abstract terms that identity should not be made the subject of politics, that Turkish politics should replace identity politics. And what he talks about is understanding the commonalities. And we know that genuinely he is not a pluralistic politician in any sense. So, and he also talks about approvingly Öcalan's and in PKK's statements, and says that there is no demand of federation, autonomy, and culturalist rights. So he treats as this absence as a positive step. So what is this? I think there's a limit that we should to the praising of Devlet Bahçeli. We're doing this because Erdoğan doesn't take any concrete step. It doesn't mean what Bahçeli is doing is for the sake of democracy or Kurdish right. I think we should have been past this and see this what it is. It is a transactional process, and with a focus of at its center there is the Middle East, and this text is I think aimed at Erdoğan and his base rather than the Kurdish movement, I
mm.
think.
I mean, I think that's really important to hear what you have to say. And, of course, there are those intricacies in also, for what it's worth, Bahçeli is definitely good with his words, right? He's always been a very good orator. So of course he's also, writing things in a way that perhaps basically anyone who reads it might be able to extract some meaning for themselves. That's, I think, also. But what do you think about, in the context of what you've just said, there was two things that stood out to me in this text as well, which I found, one of the quite unexpected things where, he talks about basically that there needs to be a ridding of the need or of the approach of homogenization and cultural, uniformity or standardization, which obviously therefore primarily is a recognition that that has been in Turkey, that has been the case in Turkey. That's how I read it. But also he talks about, you're right that he talks about the kind of moving away from identity politics to, Türkiyeleşme, so like a broad, national approach.
Yeah.
But he does also talk about, in Turkish, yerel kimlik. So like he talks about
Hmm.
local identities, which perhaps is one way of avoiding having to talk about, specific national or like specific identities. But I did find it interesting that he talks about local identities, which of course would primarily have, ramifications for the Kurdish people because, the Kurds are one of the peoples in Turkey that, inhabit quite a particular section of Turkey. But of course, there's many other communities and peoples in Turkey that definitely have local characters. To me, I read that as firstly quite unexpected from someone like Bahçeli, but also a way of him, you know, kind of proposing an alternative to autonomy and saying, look, you can have local characters, which who knows what that would mean. And obviously, again, is very broad and that would have to be figured out. But it is one way of, kind of saying, okay, you don't need autonomy, but you can have local characters or like your local identity can actually be respected as its own character and in its own right. How did you read that?
Well, I mean, Bahçeli uses, I mean, he, like you said, he has a very interesting fashion and style when he starts talking or writing. It's really hard. So he's usually filled with riddles, and it really depends how you read it. I read it. I mean, I check it's like a 17, 16, 18 A4 pages long. I copy pasted it. And I checked the word Kurd appears exactly once in the whole thing, in the 16 pages. So yes, you can you can think that localities mean something and you can fill it with autonomy. I don't think so. I mean, I think and the word Kurd appears only once, and it appears only to clarify Öcalan's roles, is explicitly does not cover it. So in Bahçeli's own words, the leadership and the representation of the Kurds, the advocacy of ethnic and categorical rights is not bound to Öcalan. So the single mention of Kurds in the entire roadmap is there to foreclose Kurdish representation. I don't think it's to acknowledge that. But I do not think that I think we're reading too much into it I may read it like a too much negatively, and you may be reading too much positively, which I think those are the things that really act as a filler that we say in a long form writing. I think the main aim is not to these things can change, in a moment. What I think is this is a political intervention to squeeze in Erdoğan, rather than it says about his real thoughts or the future of the Kurds. If we look at that, I don't think we have a positive picture, but maybe we should not read much into it because it is a technical roadmap which he sees as lacking, and he thinks he gives. I think the crux of this roadmap is also he gives um, he talks about Iranian Kurds having, weapons, and that is the example that shows to the reader or to the audience that if we do not solve this problem, we're going to have Israel and Americans have use Kurds against us, and that is a threat. That is the crux of this transaction. And what do Kurds get in return? I don't think they get very little. I think what happened in Syria, is I think being overstated as capitulations. We can talk about that if you want, but I mean, this is directed. I think Bahçeli is just trying to sell the whole process to Erdoğan and his base.
Well, let's talk about that a bit more because, as you said, there's of course a lot to talk about, perhaps this text and what it might be doing. But I think it is very clear that it is a political intervention, particularly in terms of trying to, when he talks about both, he does refer to the the presidential office or like, the presidential institution several times, but he talks about the state, which particularly in today's Turkey is basically the same thing, right?
Yeah.
So, when we talk about Erdogan, and I want to talk about this kind of interconnectedly. There's Erdogan himself, but there is also Erdogan's circle. He has advisors around him, aides, of course, he has his ministers and so on. And there's been a lot of talk around the reluctance of Erdogan. And, people have also praised that he hasn't actually tried to block the process, but he certainly hasn't, tried to strengthen it or move it forward.
Or embrace it totally, yeah.
Yes, exactly. So, there's been a lot of talk around whether this is Erdogan himself reluctant or whether that's people around him, kind of pulling him back. Some people particularly point to those like Hakan Fidan, who seem to be really against the process, unlike some of his other ministers. You know, Erdogan's reluctance, or passivity, let's call it, in this process, is it Erdogan? Is it those around him, or is it a combination?
Well, it is possible, but we can't really know. I mean, what is visible is, but I think what we need to look at is in the last 2 months, Ibrahim Kalın and Hakan Fidan, the intelligence chief and the former intelligence chief, now the foreign minister Hakan Fidan, are forging very close relations with the Syrian state, with its security and intelligence services. So they may be thinking that they can solve what they see as the main security problem through Damascus, rather than through direct cooperation with the Kurdish movement, the PKK, and SDF. So the recent increase in bilateral meetings are very visible. And I think it has implications regarding the Kurdish issue. And the Kurdish diaspora has been arguing, like you said, that for some time that Hakan Fidan is a disruptor of this process, that he's the vocal and hardliner about how disarmament is not being completed properly, so on and so forth. But I have two reservations in that reading, because both Ibrahim Kalın and Fidan have been part of the negotiations with the Kurdish movement since 2009, and they are far too experienced, I think, to underestimate the resilience and the strategic maturity of the Kurdish movement. And they are far too, I mean, they're not that too short-sighted. They are clear-eyed, on the contrary, of that any future of Turkey without stable relations with the Kurds in all parts of the Middle East is indispensable. And second, um, uh, I mean, sometimes Hakan Fidan can play the good cop, bad cop. But I've read Hakan Fidan's meetings, and a lot of information about the 2013 process. I don't think Hakan Fidan would be the one to collapse this process. And second, Erdogan seems to be back on his feet in terms of energy and health. And when he's like that, I think there's no single person around him, no aide, no minister who can change his mind. He has been his own man, since he began in politics. And I've never bought the idea that he's being influenced by. Of course, there are aides, but he's not at a life stage where he's senile like Biden or Algeria's Bouteflika. You know what I mean? I don't think he's that man that can be pulled in certain directions. Maybe at some point, at some stages, but in the end, it is his decision to, I think, stay in the backseat, because um, the reason that 2013 process failed, and failed in such a horrible state, is that he saw that forging a negotiation with the Kurds does not really bring him the popularity he wants. On the contrary, the popularity goes to the Kurdish movement, and he knows it by heart. And I think he's still uneasy with Öcalan being as the taking a center stage. And that is why I think Bahçeli is trying to package it in a way that and limiting Öcalan's place. But you know, I think Erdoğan knows too well that these things are not really, um, uh, easy to calculate beforehand.
Mm. I mean, I think that's really important to hear because I think when people t try and figure out or find reasons for perhaps why Erdogan may be holding back, I think it's part of the hope that people want to have that maybe someone else is stopping him. But I think actually there is a lot of important clarity in understanding who Erdogan is, unlike other leaders, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, for a man with his bravado, his political instinct and ego, it is striking true that Erdogan stays in the backseat, and there's a reason for that. But he does speak it occasionally. Just remember, like, he's not completely silent, so he's not leaving Bahçeli and the whole process. But he's doing it in his own terms. Like a few weeks ago, he gave a speech and he framed the process again as a central line of resistance. At a moment, in his words, I think, at a moment of um, at a moment of hidden agendas and where there's like Turkey's being exposed in the Middle East. So he used to speak it as a strengthening the front line. So it was a domestic thing. Now he's describing the process itself as a line of resistance. I'm not sure if this shift of language signals something like a real recalibration of how the initiative is positioned, but something is, I think, going on. At least, well, that's what I thought, because some mouthpieces within the pro-government media had been saying that legal amendments are expected to reach the parliament end of May, and there are things happening, and the stage. I mean, the process has entered its final stage, but then the PKK has not fully vacated. And I think, Murat Karasu from the PKK leadership put it in plain language that, I mean, it is a matter of technicality that they committed and that they will not, cross the Turkish border and wage a war against Turkey. So I think it's plain simple. I mean, that it is the legal amendments that we're awaiting. And it may be, on the way, but we're not really at the stage of discussing the technicalities of the DDR. And I think the next step should be the legal amendments. And I think this is exactly what Bahçeli is trying to provide.
Mm.
That's what I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think what all sides seem to agree on is that this process is happening in the context of a Middle East that is really changing and shifting. And,
Exactly.
whether you define it as hidden agendas or whether you define it as, Turkey being exposed, none of these are completely untrue. There are all of
True.
these elements in one way or another. So, and it
Exactly.
does seem like both Öcalan, Bahçeli, and Erdoğan, actually all of them, one thing that they have said actually in exactly the same way, not in ways that they've said it but meant different things, is there is a shift in the Middle East, and this issue needs to be resolved. Whether
Yeah.
and they probably don't agree with exactly how it's meant to be, how it should be resolved, but that this issue has to be resolved because there are basically bigger fish to fry. So
Exactly. And I
what?
think Öcalan, I think Turkey's lucky to have a someone like Öcalan as the leader of the Kurdish entities because uh, Öcalan had, countless times so what Israel's agenda is, its expansionism, and it is important to have that because, you know, I think the Kurdish movement always acted from a place of moral superiority because it is a rights-based movement, and it also argues a democratic and equal rights for everyone in the region, in all parts of the region. But this can get weary if they collaborate with a state that is in front of our eyes committing a genocide and losing the moral superiority in movements like these are can be more than conjectural, but would cause rupture. So I find it extremely important that the Kurdish movement draws a line between being strategically collaborating at some points with a genocidal state. And I think Öcalan and the movement, the PKK and the Kurdish movement in Turkey are the most clear-eyed in that sense, whereas it can be sometimes hard to say the same thing for the Kurds in Iraq or Kurds in Iran.
I mean, there's so much to talk about in this sense, but before we end, I do want to ask you about the same week that Bahçeli published this article, a Turkish court ruled that the AGM of the CHP, so the Republican People's Party, the founding party of the Turkish Republic, their last AGM deemed it invalid, which means that the current leader, Özgür Özel, and its governing body essentially have no legitimacy according to this ruling, and therefore would mean the former leader, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, and the governing body that came with him would have to, essentially take back over the party. In a simple sense, what is happening to the CHP?
Okay, I think it is appropriate to talk about it because this is not a. I think this has to be taken very seriously. This is the judiciary being used as a weapon. I mean, it is the ultimate weaponization of the judiciary in an authoritarian state and being used at full force. And what is done is, in practice, is stage a coup against parliamentary politics that was already barely functioning. And this is, I think, the second turning point of an authoritarian consolidation that modern Turkey has not experienced since the introduction of multi-party system. The first turning point was, we can say, 2010s with the weaponization again of the judiciary with fabricated cases and sham trials with AKP Gülen alliance. But also it is important to acknowledge that this kind of dismantling of the political enterprise of opposition is not new. It has been done to the Kurdish parties since their existence. Shall I count the parties? HEP, DEP, HADEP, DEHAP, DTP, HDP, now them. They're all one after another. They're banned, closed down, their MPs stripped of their immunity, imprisoned, and their mayors removed, replaced with state appointed trustees. What is striking about this current moment is not the technique exists. We know. I mean, it's been used against the Kurdish political movement since their existence. But it is deployed now against the historical founder of the Turkish, parliamentary system, the Turkish Republic. So the target is widened and a tad bit, I think, changed because Now the party is not closed. So the regime does not close the CHP, but eats it from within. It hollows it out and leaves a shelf, standing. So we've had military coups before. We had party closures, Kurdish, Islamist. We've had emergency rules. But the deliberate engineering of the opposition in this capacity to incapacitate it in this fashion, while keeping the formal architecture of the multi-party system, is something Turkey has not seen to this scale or to this intent. And surely it will make harder for the Kurdish, for example, movement to justify being in a negotiation with a regime like this that has no boundaries, no restraint, no checks on its powers, and does not hide its intention, not to have free election, or to allow a candidate that would actually have a real contest. But there's a big but, and I think it is very important. And since the beginning of this Kurdish process, I don't call it peace process. I've argued that it is transactional, security driven, and externally focused. And it is a tacit bargain. And Turkey will not, and the bargain is at the beginning, Turkey will not make a big fuss about the SDF involvement in the Syrian state and some kind of a local autonomy in Hasake, and being part of the decision process of the Syrian state. And it's happening. You know, I think we're underestimating. Yes, there has been a loss of territory, but Muslim Kobani acknowledged that there were mistakes made in Raqqa and Deir Zor. So, but at the end, now there's a lot of things happening in Syria, positive steps, and Turkey is not really messing with that. So this is the thing. So I do not think the Kurdish movement ever expected this process to bring democracy or economic prosperity to Turkey. I think they were really clear-eyed in that sense. The best realistic outcome is some legal amendments that would allow the militias in Kandil or other camps to return their homeland.
Mm.
And the rest will be wrestled over Syria and through Israel's disruption. I think, and even Bahçeli makes this connection explicit with the Iran war and Trump's declaration of giving weapons to the Kurds. So when the CHP is being dismantled in a parallel to this process, this is not happening because of the Kurdish process or in spite of it. That's what I'm trying to say.
Mm.
Authoritarian regimes, governments make negotiations like this all the time. They approach conflicts like this in this fashion all the time. So fighting against or arguing against this process, this transactional process, on the grounds that it will not bring democracy or that it will strengthen Erdogan's regime, I think gets the politics wrong. Because it was never about democracy, and it is treated as a security question above politics. And I don't think it will strengthen Erdogan, because Erdogan doesn't need the Kurds as he did 10 years ago. He's not able to change. He is able to change the rules of the game. He's able to change the game itself. So it is, unfortunately, I mean, this is not something positive what I'm saying, but he can leave people with a basketball in a football field. He has that capacity right now, and he doesn't. He's not limiting himself. So, if anything, the Öcalan factor has some potential to make him, slip a bit, which is exactly why he stays within the region of deniability and lets Bahçeli carry the public weight. So my honest reading is that Erdogan government can and maybe will probably finalize this Kurdish process, pass this transactional process, pass a few amendments, refrain from being an obstacle for the Kurds in Syria, and find a politically low risk, solution to Öcalan's status that would satisfy them, the PKK leadership. And but when they're done with the CHP, you will likely see a similar crackdown on the political, party, Dem party. That is the pattern. So, and this should not shock anyone. This is Turkey now fully authoritarian, and the current international constellation of power not only gives it free reign, but it enables it. It gives so he's no longer constrained by anything. So the hard thing for the Kurdish movement and for the CHP electorate, for all of us, is to hold two thoughts at once. You know what I mean? So that the Kurdish process may produce something positive for the Kurds, end of the fighting, start of homecoming for the militias, which is, I don't think, which we understand what it means for the Kurdish mothers and sisters or brothers living in Diyarbakir or Shirnak. So it can bring something good in its own narrow security-driven, sense in its terms. But this changes nothing about the authoritarian trajectory of the country. We need to clarify our minds about this, and we will together bring democracy to Turkey. But this is not fully. There's no causation link with this process, and it is just a correlation. So we will bring democracy together, Turks, Kurds, Arabs, Armenians, Jews, and Alawites together. But I think there will be harder days in front of us before it gets better.
Thank you so much for your time and for your thoughts as always, Ezgi. It's such a pleasure to speak to you and to hear, your analysis of everything.
Thank you, Elif'ciğim, and thank you to Amargi readers.
Thank you. And that's it for today's episode of the Amargi Mosaic. Until next time, take care.